In people-facing roles, there's always a fire to put out. There's always someone that needs you. There's something that needs to be done. And so to build something that's next while you're in a role that's very people-facing can easily become something that's just sitting on the desk, a thought, a plan, a hope that never gets touched again. And she was so instrumental in not letting it be that and saying, we have to carve out time for you. Asking good questions. What's happening next with this? And that helped me believe this could be real.
Welcome to At the Table, a podcast hosted by me, Drew Sams. I'm the senior pastor at Bel Air Church in Los Angeles. And today we have a special guest. Her name is Jillian Kim. She is the CEO of the Bel Air Ed Group. And part of that is she is also the head of our preschool. I hired her 8 years ago and into that school, which is one of the largest in Los Angeles and one of the last to teach the Bible 5 days a week. But not only is she an educator, but she is a leader of teams. She's a builder of organizations. And regardless of your background, you're going to discover her why and how you can find your why and how that can help you amidst all the noise, the distraction of life, how to get connected and stay connected, the importance of having mentors and people speaking into your life. And this podcast, At the Table, wants to spend time diving deeper into lives, looking back on their journey, their origin story. And it's interesting when you look at the life of Jesus, he spent, it seems like, the most amount of time with people surrounding meals. It was as if that was a space that created space for people to open up and share. And so would you dive in with us to At the Table, episode 3 with Jillian Kim. Jillian, here we are at the table. So excited to have you. Jillian, you've been not only the head of school at Bel Air Preschool for coming up on 8 years, but in the last 9 months, you've been the CEO of the Bel Air Ed Group. We're going to get into all of that. But before Los Angeles, you were in Atlanta, originally grew up in Indiana. You've been an educator, board member. You've covered a lot of roles. But as we get into this At the Table podcast, my first question for you, what tea do you have today?
Ooh, it's very basic today. We've just got a little chamomile here.
Chamomile. It's a tea day
It's a tea
in
day.
LA. I've got my Yogi Egyptian licorice. And, these mugs here come from the coffee shop that you also oversee, which is Parable Coffee Lab. We'll get into all of that. But, I'm really curious because you've made such an impact here in Los Angeles. You are the head of one of the largest preschools in Los Angeles. You are helping lead up the Los Angeles Preschool Partnership, 85 private preschools. You are an in-demand educator, overseer of staff. And I'm curious, was there one person growing up that made you fall in love with education? Is there one that you can think of?
It's such a good question. I think there were so many different people where there were different pieces that I admired. But it always goes back to my third grade teacher, Angie
Why is it always
Garrettson.
the third grade?
It's always third grade.
It's so formative.
It is formative. It's because you...
What was her name?
Angie Garrettson.
Nice.
And you know what's really cool about that? My very first teaching job out of school, I was able to go back to the elementary school that I attended, and Angie Garrettson was still teaching. So we were on staff together for a short time, which I think was so neat to, walk in those same halls as a small kid, but think I finally was doing what she had done that was so impactful in my life.
So is there one thing that you think of? I know it's many years removed from that third grade but what are some things that stand out in your memory?
Well, she was, I look back now, she was super young. I remember she was 28, and I just thought that was so cool. And she talked to us so organically. She was a teacher, but we were her friends. She really saw us as people. She had this mini economy system in the class, and we could have jobs and earn money. And the biggest thing you could save your money for was to go to lunch with the teacher. And
That's
so
amazing.
I would have all these jobs and save all my money all year. And I just wanted to be around her. She was so inspiring. She was so kind. But looking back as an adult, she really knew me. She knew us. So she would find little ways to connect, or she'd be like, I think you would really like this book. Do you want to check it out from the library? But she also told us about her life. She had a boyfriend, I remember, and I thought that was so cool. Like, she was this real person. And she was really into aerobics. I mean, that'll date me, like the scrunchy socks. And so she taught us how to dance the Macarena in school because she'd been learning it at aerobics class. So I think she was just this person that was so influential in my education, but she was so cool. And I remember thinking, like, I want to be like her. I wanted her life as what was I, 8 years old? She just embodied like everything that I thought somebody should be.
So it was more than just in the classroom.
Yeah.
There was like this three-dimensional person.
Yeah.
And we'll get into your journey in a moment, but did you know from then on that you wanted to go into education, or was there like three things that were on your radar? Astronaut, president, and then it kind of narrowed down over the years, or was it pretty single focused?
I don't feel like it was ever single focused, but when I look back now, I think my parents, people that were around me, they were like, it was single focused. I didn't see it that way, but I grew up in Indiana, so you have big basements there, 2-story house and a basement. And I converted that whole basement into a classroom. I have 2 younger sisters. And so, I would drag them down and they were my students and we had lessons and I would save my little money and go to the teacher store and buy supplies. So I enjoyed that. But then as I got older, it wasn't really a profession I considered. I was thinking of different things. I wanted to be in business. I thought about music at some point. I did a lot of acting and musical theater growing up. I thought maybe I would explore something there. And then I was super involved in church growing up. So I actually had even considered ministry at some point. So there were a lot of different things that I considered. And it was time to declare a major in school. And I had not declared education. I chose like political science or something.
This was your undergrad,
something.
Right?
Undergrad.
Where'd you go to undergrad?
Taylor University.
Yeah, that's right.
In Indiana. And someone said to me in my senior year of high school, they said, you will impact more students and families through the educational system than you ever will in any of these other things that you are exploring. And you always come back to saying that's what you care about. And I switched my major, started, and here I am. So a long way to say, like, I didn't think of it as singular path, but as I say it out loud, it sounds pretty clear, like it was the path.
Well, going back to that comment where you're going to impact so many more young people in the next generation through education. Yeah. I remember in seminary there was a professor, Chap Clark, if I can remember correctly, and he said, if you study, especially like Western history throughout Europe, that for centuries the church was the center of society. And it was the place where you got your news. It was the place where there would be town hall meetings. It was the place where if they were attacked, people would, go for shelter. And there was a marked shift in the United States, if my memory serves me correctly, in like the 1950s, where it moved away from the church to the local school. And now it's the school that's the center of a community. It's often the school where town hall meetings happen. It's the school where people run to for refuge, for resources, for help. So there was that perspective given to you many years ago. You've been an educator, so much so that you are now not only the head of one of the largest preschools in Los Angeles, but the CEO of the Bel Air Ed Group that has multiple arms to it, which we'll get into. Do you think that statement was right many years ago, that you're going to impact a lot of people, a lot more people going down this route?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think, I just took it at face value then, thinking, well, that's true if I'm in the classroom. And I thought I would teach forever. I was an elementary school teacher, and so I was multiplying, if I work 30 years times how many kids in the class, that's a lot of students. And I never would have really guessed what impacting the community would mean. And it's exactly what you're saying. And I would say in the last even probably 5 years of my career, the statement that you've made has been even more true, that school becomes that heartbeat of a community in ways that maybe some would say it wasn't designed to be originally, ways we wouldn't expect. So those words from a long time ago are true in a way that I wasn't wise enough to pick up on at the time.
But looking back in the
Yeah.
rearview mirror, you can see it in a deeper, richer
Yeah.
way, right? So it's been 8 years, roughly, coming up on 8 years. I think it was the summer of 2017.
It was July 10th, 2017.
The date, I love it.
remember the date.
And you moved from Atlanta, to Los Angeles. A couple questions.
Mm-hmm.
What's the number one thing from Atlanta that you miss the most in that move?
Oh, number one.
Or one of the top things that you miss from Atlanta?
Traffic is bad in Atlanta, but it's not nearly as bad as LA. I had a great commute, so I think I miss that. And then the food scene is really good in Atlanta.
Yeah.
There are a lot of great restaurants that were starting to go in right as I left. So there are a few that I'm still like, I'm craving that breakfast. We have great food here, but
Some of those local places you can't replicate, right?
Rumi's Kitchen.
Rooney's Kitchen.
Rumi's Kitchen. Yeah.
And then what's something about Los Angeles that totally took you by surprise? There's that outside looking in perspective, but once you've been here, you're now a local, 8 years.
Yeah. Oh, I have to think for a minute. What has really surprised me the most in Los Angeles?
Or something that you love about LA.
Yeah. There's so many things that I love. I guess what surprises me is, I'd spent time in LA, I have family here, and you kind of always get this idea that LA can be cold or everybody's very focused on themselves. And I've actually found a lot of LA to be opposite of that. I think that there's a different entry point in LA than Atlanta. Atlanta's very southern hospitality. I don't know. A lot of people probably wouldn't agree with me, but there's some realness to LA. I think you just have to get beneath the surface, and that surprised me. I found it to be more authentic than Atlanta.
That's interesting.
Yeah, personally.
Yeah, culturally too, a huge difference and a bigger melting pot here, or mixed salad, as some people prefer to say, in Los Angeles. But what was one thing, it's a big move to move across the country, to go from Atlanta to Los Angeles. What was one thing just in those early decision-making processes to taking the role here? Again, originally it was the head of the preschool. That really drew you to the role in particular and coming to this place? Because there's a lot of people I'm sure listening in, they reach that point where they have to make a decision about where to live, where to work, where to go to school. How did you process that decision? That's a big decision. It's one of those formative, not only a new job, but a new time zone, a new coast.
There was... It wasn't a hard decision. The process here had been so great, and you were such a part of that. So that was one piece of it. I always knew that I was going to be here at some point, and that sounds weird. I feel like people say that, like I knew. But like I said, I have family here, and so growing up, I grew up in the Midwest, but we would travel out to LA. And so I remember one trip in particular, I had just turned 14, and I was like, I'm going to live here. And I journaled a lot. I was a nerdy kid. So, so I was journaling, and I remember going home and I wrote, "Can you be homesick for a place that you've never lived?" Like so emo, right?
Totally emo.
But that kind of stuck. And, it wasn't just because like I loved the beach or whatever. Sure. Like LA is a beautiful place to be. Southern California is beautiful. But I remember I had a relative that had actually taught school for years in Los Angeles, and hearing stories of what his life had looked like, there were just so many moments to connect with so many different people. So that diversity piece like really resonated with me. And I remember like as a teen and into college, like really praying, like, God, is that just something I want, or is that what you have for me? I ended up in Atlanta. So there were those years where I thought maybe that's not the path. In Atlanta, I met my now husband, and on our second date, he said, "If there's anywhere you could live, where would it be?" And I said, "Oh, hands down Los Angeles, and here's why." And he stopped and he goes, "What? Me too." And then he shares these stories of like being relocated with the company he's with. So all of that to say, by the time that it was making the decision to move here, it was so clear that there had been this plan that God had of planting some of those seeds of of this was supposed to be home. Now, it wasn't supposed to be home when I was 20 or 22. And those years in Atlanta were really important. But I don't know. It wasn't a hard decision. It felt like coming home. And that might sound weird.
No, totally. I mean, there was a backstory to it.
Yeah.
It sounded like.
So sure, there was a lot. Like it's a big move across the country. There's a lot of planning. It's a big transition, but it was actually, the transition felt more simple than moving from the Midwest to Atlanta. Moving from Atlanta to LA felt very natural, and it just felt like coming home.
And you come across the country with that backstory like you were talking about, but you're in a brand new organization and you're in charge of all the staff of kind of a historical preschool. It had been around for many decades, large budget, things to navigate. What was one thing that, let's say, within the first couple months you realized, this is beyond my skill set, or I'm in over my head on this one particular topic?
Yeah.
Was there anything that you kind of ran up against where you needed to ask for help, to get coaching, because I think people make decisions and they go somewhere, and sometimes it's easy and sometimes it is very difficult.
So I think it was a couple of things. I felt ready because I knew it would be a challenge. I remember in the first couple of months, I'm like, do they know how old I am? I don't know if they knew. Like, I don't know if they really maybe I'm not ready for this. Am I fooling everybody here? I had some of those feelings, the imposter syndrome. Yeah. But I also was like, but I can do this. Like, this is a challenge that I want. I think the first thing that came up, I was leading a school. And so the organizational things, the business side of school, the educational piece, like I felt like I had the experience to do that. The parents at the school were very different than parents that I'd had in Atlanta. On paper, they could look similar, but some of the things that came up in the first year I was here, I was like, how do you navigate this? Like, they don't teach you in school. If you come from a very different location, you don't have experience to pull from. And so, I was so grateful to have the church here, and I remember going to you all sometimes. And then being one of 6 independent schools up here on the hill on Mulholland Drive, I remember talking to Dr. Staley, who was the head of Berkeley Hall at that time, and just learning so much from her. She had so many years of experience on me at that time, but she had also been in her role, I think, for 8 years at that time. And so just to hear another woman leader in schools say, like, you're not crazy for wondering that. Like, I think she had said to me, I remember the conversation of, you're going to be in a role, and there are so many different stakeholders, and each of those stakeholders thinks your job is a different thing. And she said, you are leading a school, you're the CEO of an organization. This was before being the CEO of an organization. And she said, it's going to come together, but just know, like, you will make the right decision in the moment. You'll learn over time, and you can't please everybody. And I think just hearing that over and over, like, you can't please everybody. It's so simple, but that helped a lot. I think it was that moment when I felt like everybody has a different idea of what I'm supposed to be doing here, and the parents are really different than they were in Atlanta. There were a couple of moments I thought, am I in over my head, or am I going to figure this out?
And did you take the approach where some people do, where they come into a new space, organization, team, and they say, I'm not going to make any changes for the first fill in the blank, 6 months, year. I've heard other people say a very different philosophy, make changes while the cement is wet.
Yeah.
What was your approach? And would you, looking back, have done a different approach?
So my approach was definitely the first. And that came from, as you know well, there was a staff at the school that had gone through so many leaders. So that was the first place. There were incremental changes that I knew could be outward facing and could be really impactful for kids, parents, and community. And I knew those teachers, those administrators could be on board with that because it made them feel good. It made them look good. But I really committed to not making any major changes that would impact the people that had stayed and were working here for the first year. Now, I knew where we needed to go, but I really wanted to listen and have conversations because I knew that if I didn't have their buy-in, we wouldn't get anywhere. And so while there were changes, I was very, very careful to to not make any personnel impacting changes in that first year, because I felt that people needed to be heard. They needed to feel appreciated. They had poured in so much to, as you mentioned earlier, this historic preschool. They wanted to be here. And, they were scared. Here's somebody new. She's coming from Atlanta. I got here. I didn't have a Southern accent. They were really confused by that. And, instead of talking, I was listening. But then I was saying, okay, I hear that. Let's find a way forward with that. So that's one thing I wouldn't change. I felt that that the team really needed a supporter and a leader. And had I come in and just led without supporting, I don't think we'd be where we are today. I probably wouldn't be sitting here today.
And now here we are 8 years later.
Yeah.
And then those 8 years really aren't a typical 8 years, because bifurcated right in the middle of those 8 years was the pandemic. And,
Yes.
we're in Los Angeles, and of course, Los Angeles experienced the pandemic very different than, let's say, Destin, Florida, different than Atlanta, different than Nairobi. And I know we have people that join in from around LA and the state, nation, and globe. And so LA is a particular context and place. But looking back on those 8 years, have you experienced a marked difference in community, education, pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic?
Yes.
Here in LA. And let's just speak to our context, because it's different everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And there was different responses in different cities, but
Right. Definitely in Los Angeles, for sure. Preschool all the way through 12th grade. Definitely in our direct context right here. I kind of feel like I had two careers. I had the career before 2020 and the career after 2020. Prior to 2020, it was school. And it was making educational decisions, leading people well, being available. During 2020, I don't feel like I touched education at all. It was making sure people felt safe, navigating healthcare, like learning a skill set that none of us had, but that for those of us leading schools had to kind of learn overnight. And then through that, and I would say post, back to the point you made of schools becoming this hub, I've really seen that, especially in our early education communities. It was a scary time for all of us, but especially brand new parents with a young child. The whole world feels like it's falling apart. You can't get access to things that you used to be able to do in person. Everybody has a different opinion, and they're very strong. Everybody really looked for school to be strong academically, developmentally, but they needed school to guide the way for them. I mean, the conversations that happened during 20 and 21 and that happen now, I just never would have, they never would have crossed my desk prior to that time. So I feel that, especially in early childhood, the first couple of years after the pandemic, we were dealing with more developmental delays, learning losses, things that people would expect. I can't quite put my finger on it, but the family dynamic has shifted. Families are wanting to connect. I think the skill set of naturally connecting, the context here, we live in neighborhoods that are very geographically spread out just by we live in the mountains. You don't just walk down the street as easily. But then we spent a almost 3 year period where we couldn't connect. And so you have these young families who want that, but it's almost like the skill isn't as natural anymore. And, there's a lot of social learning for all of us to build that back. And so all of that to say, I think that I've really seen this facilitation of community become more of the focus post-pandemic at Bel Air, but in early childhood, in addition to what it was before.
Yeah, and it's interesting on top of that, my observation, so third generation Angelino and growing up here in LA and living through the same season that you did, navigating it from a different seat, in the organization as the head of staff and senior pastor. But it seems like within my friend group and within the church and broader that there seemed to be this sense of, for a season, people didn't have to go to the things they previously felt obligated to do so. And it seems like, based on some of my conversations, that coming out of it, now years removed from it, people are saying, I'm not going to go to those things that I don't have to go to, but rather I'm going to invest the time that I do have in the things that are a higher priority. And I'm curious if you've seen some of that with families saying, I want to invest in my family, in my kids, in my school, giving up the time for all the like social obligations, which there's a lot of in our culture.
Yeah, I definitely have seen that. I think, you had this period of time where for so many, like, everybody was trapped in the house, right? There are kids on iPads, Zooming to learn, parents trying to work from home, maybe extended family staying there. And while there was like stress for so many in that, there was also that beautiful, like, wow, we're together. Like, when can we think of the last time we've had that much time together? And so I definitely have heard and seen from young families, a freedom to say no to things, or I would say to make some life changes of, wow, I really stepped back and evaluated my career. I say that my family is the most important thing, but I realized I was, traveling 4 days a week, 3 weeks a month, and I miss all the games or whatever it might be. And so I think that there's definitely been kind of larger shifts like that, along with, like you've said, I even feel it myself. Like, you're like, man, remember that time where I didn't have to say yes to that? So I think a collective idea of let's say yes to what matters most. We can't say no to everything, but let's say yes to what matters most, and let's actually do more of what we say we care about. And so I think when it comes to family, I have seen a trend, especially in this context, more dads that are getting to spend more time with their kids and being able to be more present. So I think some of that shifted just with how corporate America shifted, where there are some flexibilities. And so, I would say that's a silver lining of typically at a preschool, you would not see as many dads. If you kind of think stereotypical roles, day to day, interacting at the preschool with their kids. And it's a really regular occurrence now. So I think, I think it's true. I think people were able to step back and reevaluate a little bit.
And with your career, like you said, being the pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, coming out of it, I know you have an entrepreneurial thread that is very alive and well in you. And I noticed you kind of saw some trends popping up.
Yeah.
And that led to ultimately the development of the Bel Air Ed Group, which is, of course, the preschool, which how many years? It's 40 plus years now, right?
Yeah, it was opened in 1979. So
amazing.
A long time.
Yeah, so 46 years. Yeah. And in addition to that, we have a coffee shop on our campus. So we are the only church on Mulholland, famous Mulholland Drive,
Yep.
The amazing Tom Petty song. I think there was a movie, Mulholland Drive, as well. Most people know of Mulholland. The only church, the only preschool, and the only coffee shop.
Yep.
On the Mulholland Educational Corridor, which you mentioned earlier, 6 schools. One of those is just celebrated, I think it's 100th year, the Curtis School right down the road. So there's a lot of history here for academics. But in addition to the preschool, which you're still the head of, and now you oversee the Parable Coffee Lab, which is a great community space open during the week for people in the community. And as I had mentioned, that you're the head of the Los Angeles Preschool Partnership, right? 85 private preschools in Los Angeles. We might get to that in a bit. But you have launched in this recent season the Bel Air Family Center.
Yes.
So those are things that exist today. But I'm curious, how do you go from something not existing to being curious about something, seeing trends, to then having the ability to formulate an idea that ultimately becomes an entity that has classes and resources and fundraising and momentum that is meeting needs? Walk me through kind of the beginning of nothing to something.
Well, I think that the first part comes from encouragement, right? Of people, you start to hear these patterns and you can tell that something more is needed. But it can land there, like something more is needed. And then what? And I always have been wired to say, like, well, what's next? How do we accomplish that? I do thrive in change and growth, and like that's the place where I actually feel most comfortable. So that piece was comfortable for me. But to your point, to take an idea of nothing that exists and then build it out, that felt a little daunting and overwhelming, because you start in this space where you have like disjointed thoughts and patterns in your mind. And then you try to talk about it to people, and like some people get it, some people don't. You feel like you're jumbled, and you're trying to kind of chart this path while handling everything else as well. A wonderful mentor to I think a couple of us in this room, Cam Starrett, was an amazing mentor who would ask the right questions and wouldn't let it be something that went to the back burner. So in people-facing roles, there's always a fire to put out. There's always someone that needs you. There's something that needs to be done. And so to build something that's next while you're in a role that's very people-facing can easily become something that's just sitting on the desk, a thought, a plan, a hope that never gets touched again. And she was so instrumental in not letting it be that and saying, we have to carve out time for you, asking good questions. What's happening next with this? And that helped me believe this could be real, because while I was willing to build it, when it felt like an idea in my mind, there was doubt that came in. I don't want to build something that nobody else wants or needs. That wouldn't bring me fulfillment. That's not what we're here for. But at the same time, to be in charge of building it, I needed some groundwork. So I spent about 3 years doing a lot of research. And I would say the first year and a half of that, it was a lot of personal research. I was reading. I'm an avid reader. I was looking at what's out there, and then I was looking at what isn't out there. And I was watching for patterns within this community. After the pandemic, what do people need and what are they saying? And as I said, my role had shifted really from overseeing a school to really supporting the community. And so the patterns I noticed, people were calling back to Bel Air after the kids had graduated the school, and something would come up in their family, something came up with their kids. They trusted the resources that we would connect them to here. And so many people would say, it just feels safe at Bel Air. It feels like home. I just want to come back in and chat. Who do you know? Because I'll trust them. And that was coming up over and over and over. These trusted resources. That was a pattern. I would say also during the pandemic, there was a rise in parent influencers on social media. And I saw these parents just feeling like overwhelmed by the noise of what's right, what do I follow? I'm never doing it right if I'm comparing myself here. We just want to know what's legitimate. Like, are we doing this thing called parenting right? And who should we go to? Like, what are the right voices in this space regarding parenting education? And then this pattern, like I said, of families that were here with us, but also families that have maybe been here 5 years ago, wanting to connect again and wanting to be able to connect in a way that was meaningful for their family at this stage in life. So that's kind of where I started putting these patterns together. I was able to work with a lot of great individuals that could take the creativity and the vision casting that I have, but make it a little bit more strategic. So I think that was the key part, a year and a half end, was after having all of this research, okay, what do I do with this? And how do I make this into something that's real? How do we advertise this? And how do we make sure what we're offering is actually meeting the needs of people? And so I would say what was really freeing in that is we kind of started to create these categories that were responding to those patterns: parent education, recreation, the opportunity to get together and connect, learning together, creating opportunities for a parent and a child to learn something new together, and community. And that was very freeing to have kind of these big buckets to say, this is what people want. We can try things within these areas, and then we can evolve over time. And I think that the biggest hurdle mentally for me to get over was to, look at this amazing church, this amazing school that have been, we've been here for so long. We do church well, we do school well. But to take this other piece that doesn't exist, there's no blueprint for it, and to have it operating on the same campus where there is so much history, and kind of to be the new thing on the street. And so, I think when I finally realized that it was okay to enter that with some humility and say, this is going to change over time, but we need to start because you're all saying you need it. Let's do it.
So
that makes sense?
Totally. And what's interesting is it wasn't that you just all of a sudden had this idea out of a vacuum of your own thinking.
Yeah.
but rather there was encouragement coming from the community as they had graduated from the preschool, reaching out, asking for help, trying to get connected to things. So you're seeing some things and then you're responding, but then that's where the idea pops up at an early stage. You know, and it reminds me, my oldest son, Judah, he's 12 years old right now, graduate of the preschool, along with my youngest, Barrett, who's 7 at this time, graduate of the preschool. But he goes up to me yesterday and he says, Dad, I'm starting a business. And I said, awesome. Tell me about this business. He says, well, it's 3D printing. And I said, oh, do you have a 3D printer? He says, well, no, not yet, but it's a group of friends and we're going to get together. And I'm curious if you think that 3D printed flower vases would sell really well. And I said, well, who's your target audience? And he said, well, it's my classmates. And I said, have you asked any of them what they would buy? And he says, well, no, I'm a little nervous too. So I'm asking you. And I'm like, well, this is good practice for asking them. Because I might give you an answer, but I'm not your target audience. And he says, are you saying that I need to like go and talk to my classmates about the things that they would buy? I said, well, if you're going to, wanting to start a business to meet a need, to sell to them, just have some conversations. Like if you could have any 3D printed thing. And so then all of a sudden he got all excited about it. And it reminds me like sometimes we want to start some things, but it's just because it's an idea in our head.
Right.
And that's so different than starting something to meet a very real need. But how you did it wasn't in isolation. You got people around you. It was 3 years of research.
Yeah.
And it took a very different trajectory, I imagine, than some of your early thinking. Yeah. And so how would you describe the Bel Air Family Center right now? And it's in its first few months. Yeah. And it's going to look different 3 years from now. But what are describe to me the Bel Air Family Center for those that don't yet know about it.
Well, our line is get connected, stay connected. So whether that's a teacher and a student connecting, a parent and an administrator, a parent and a child, a parent and another parent, that was the goal, and that's happening. So we've had basketball clinics through recreation, and what's been so great about that is there are kids from Bel Air Preschool that are participating. There are kids that no longer attend Bel Air Preschool participating. Their parents go with them, and then we have coaches that are volunteering to do that. And so it's bringing all of these people together around this fun idea of teamwork and learning basic skills. But the types of parent conversations that are happening on the sidelines are exactly what I hoped for, and I think the community hoped for with the Bel Air Family Center. We have a book club that we're doing just about monthly, and
what's the current book right now?
Yes, the book we're just getting ready to start is Operating Instructions by Anne Lamott. I've shared about this. I've shared it with you a little bit, Drew. People get a window into what I love. I love introducing people to books that they may not pick up on their own. There may be a totally different lifestyle or parenting model, a different decade. This book was written in 93. But we start these book clubs that it's a no judgment zone. In meaning that if you're coming as a parent, nobody's going to tell you that you're failing or that you haven't done it well. And it's been this really beautiful place of vulnerability, but also growth. It's also taught me that there's such a wealth of information that Bel Air Preschool has that we can share through the Family Center that teachers, administrators take for granted. We do this all the time. We've studied this, and we go into these sessions and I'm trying to pull out, what I think are the best nuggets from the books. And I'm really amazed that some of the simplest things have become the most profound. And it's really opened up, again, the get connected, stay connected, a new connection with a parent that I didn't have before. Two parents that have kids of different ages that can kind of like walk with each other and help each other through phases that, for a mom to say, I've been there, it will get better. Here's what I did. Like, let me come alongside you. So it's really organic right now. And that's, it's not fully up to me, but if I could have had a hope, that's exactly what I wanted it to look like at the beginning, because then we can see what sticks and what works and what people need.
And in your research in those 3 years, I think I know the answer to this, but Is there anything like this in LA, California, or in the US that's in the similar, or was there anything that really inspired you?
Yeah. So I did have a lot of inspiration. I'll speak about the place that inspired me a lot. When I looked around LA, and specifically the area that we are in, we have a couple of community centers, YMCAs, but as far as having a community center feel with a targeted focus on family, we didn't have that. Also, in our location, if you want to go with your kids to a park, you have to drive pretty far. There's nowhere to go. We have beautiful playgrounds and outdoor spaces here, places to connect. There was nothing like that. If you want to go enjoy a gym, there's nothing actually close by. And something I have said from the beginning as well is, my faith informs how I lead, how I build, how I create. And I wasn't seeing anything like that either, where there could be these touch points of outreach, if you will. Where I did draw a lot of inspiration was the 92nd Street Y in New York City on the Upper East Side. And I'd followed them for years. And I just thought, wow, this is so amazing. They have this preschool that's tucked into this building, and all of these amazing community programs that people stay connected with for years and years. And so while what we offer is different, we are catering to this context, being able to offer something to every member of the family at any point in their journey, any age group in life, was something that resonated so deeply. And to see the success and the impact in New York for, I think it's been 100 years, of the 92nd Street Y, I was really inspired. And I thought, wow, if we can do even a fraction of that here and connect people and stay with them through the growth of their family, let's figure it out. Let's do it.
And your offerings are for elementary age kids, parents of all ages, empty nesters, grandparents even.
Yes.
And so being able to open that up to be able to resource that multi-generational is so amazing. You said a little bit ago that your faith informs the work that you do in the world, and you see it as outreach. I know that the percentage of the families that make up the preschool has stayed pretty consistent in terms of the percentage of those that are currently or historically connected to the church versus the broader community. And even though the Bel Air Preschool was launched by Bel Air Church and is essentially an entity within Bel Air Church, it's on its separate 501c3. Can you speak to the percentage of those that are not part of the church when they join the school?
Yeah. So in the 8 years that I've been here, typically 90% of the families that come into the preschool are not members of the church. They may have come to a service. They may not have. A lot of them first find out about Bel Air because of the school. They move to the area because they know there are a lot of great schools up here. They hear about the preschool. And we are very transparent when we tour. I always say from tour to graduation, we're transparent about who we are. You're going to have an amazing education. You're going to be supported in this community. And your child is going to learn the Bible while they're here. And whether that is something that your family's familiar with or not, we're here for you. We want you to feel known. We want you to feel celebrated while you're here. And we also want you to know what your child's going to experience in class. And it's been, that's been more my experience. I've been in education, right? I started in public school, but the openness for families, we have so many families that are multi-faith families, or families that say, I'm fine with my child having these lessons at school. It's not necessarily something we practice, but we're open to it. But often what happens over time, you see it. Families from the preschool, they show up at events at Bel Air Church. They show up at Christmas service. Their child gets baptized. And so it always starts with offering a great product, which is great education, but being transparent. But I think back to your original question, I kind of wandered there, is we've always been a largely community-based school. But I think when we hear community, we think it's just people from the neighborhood kind of wandering over. No, we say community. It's LA has looked to this school to be a great school that has always been very transparent about who we are, and that's attracted people. And I think that that's such a special and unique thing about Bel Air Preschool in particular.
I know you have households who live right down the street and households that are driving in from nearly an hour away.
Yeah.
So it's drawing from of wide variety. And I know that because faith is such a core part of who you are and how you lead, but it's open to the whole community. And though the school has had a lot of different chapters to its story over the years, when you first came in, there was no formal Bible curriculum.
No.
You reintroduced and brought back a Bible curriculum 5 days a week. And within that, I know that there's an approach that you take through your teachers and through your faculty, but it's open to all. And I know that this language might not be familiar with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even familiar with this language until just recently. But I understand that there's, broadly speaking, and I know that this is a broad generalization, that there typically in Christian education is two approaches. There's what's called covenantal and missional. And if you're outside of the Christian world, this is brand new language. And yet I, being within, as a pastor, wasn't even familiar with this.
Yeah.
But can you explain the two?
Yeah.
What Bel Air Preschool is and why you're a big advocate?
Yes.
And why I'm a big advocate for it as well.
I would be happy to. So I will describe Bel Air Preschool. We are missional. Always have been. And why I'm such an advocate is, I mean, I think so much of what I've shared so far, the impact that not only happens for kids, but for families. Everybody's on a journey. You know, I mean, that phrase gets used so often, but I have always been such a believer of that because, you know, Jesus meets us each in different places. Like, he's always there and we're not always ready. And I think as soon as we think that kids or families have to fit a certain mold and they have to be members and it has to be two parents and they both have to be, you know, have to write their testimony to come into school. From my perspective, and I do feel strongly about this, we've lost the opportunity to talk to 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. We've lost the opportunity to talk to families. I mean, it's a great thing to be a part of Bel Air Church because families know they have access to a pastor should they want. So rarely is a parent coming into my office to talk about theology. And if they would, I'd say, let me refer you to somebody who would be a better resource. But often it's parents who may not be a believer, but they'll open up about something because it's that safe space. They know where I stand. And that at the end of that meeting, I'm not trying to get them to a certain place, but they're open to their child moving to a different place on their journey while they're with us. So in that missional style that we are at Bel Air, that's where I see God at work. And, you know, when you talk about Christian education, that's where I see the impact. And, you know, it goes beyond students. It goes beyond families. Staff, you know, our staff, they sign a commitment of faith, but even to see how that journeys for them over the years as they're teaching the Bible to kids, and when they see faith start for the kid, or, you know, faith planted for a child, like the impact that has on a teacher, there's just so many layers of why being open to families that may not yet know Jesus is so important.
Yeah. So to clearly define if people, and you already articulated, but a covenantal approach is that in addition to the teachers signing a statement of faith, both parents, or if it's just one parent raising a child, has to not only sign a statement of faith themselves, but also be a member of either a local church or the church connected to it. So you have, in a sense, people already Christian.
Yeah.
Missional, on the other hand, while still having faculty and staff signing a statement of faith, though we're all on a journey of maturity and growing the deepness of what that means, it does not require parents to sign a statement of faith.
Right.
And they can come from a variety of backgrounds, but there's a clarity knowing that this is a Christian preschool. And so do you have any just broad stories of saying like, gosh, that's a little window into, that's a little snapshot into why this is so important to open up this education for all people that you can think back over the last 8 years. And you can speak as broad as you want, you know. I know there's confidentiality and stuff with parents.
I can definitely speak broadly. You know, something I think about a lot is how much will our students remember from Bel Air Preschool? They're 5 when they graduate. So, you know, they'll remember a few things in the first few months of kindergarten when they leave. They may remember, you know, what class they were in once they're in first grade. After that, those memories start to fade, and that's normal development. So when I think about the faith piece in our Bible lessons, I ask myself, like, how much are they really hearing? Like, how much do they really know? But then I had to think about myself. I remember at 5 kneeling by the bed with my mom, and, my concept of like what it meant to ask Jesus to be my savior was that of a 5-year-old. But like, I remember that, like, that's vivid for me. And that, my life took turns after that. But when I think back of what I could comprehend, I remember the lighting in the room. I remember exactly how that felt, and I remember what that meant to me. And so when I think about that, and I think about our students here, and anytime I'm questioning, like, how much can they really grasp? Like, how much of this will last? I have to remember what I looked like at 5, and I know it does last. So here's a couple of those stories. So there's a little girl. She's in elementary school now, and her parents aren't believers, but they were totally fine with her attending Bel Air. And Bible became her thing. She was just like, Bible time is what I love, like all day, every day. Like, she wanted to come to school for that. She, was started talking about it at home a lot. And she kept asking for a Bible. Like, she wanted a Bible because she liked the one we had at school and she wanted to have one at home. And so, like, her mom would tell me this, and I've, gotten to know the family really well. Well, during her last year at Bel Air Preschool, she was having conversations with her teacher often, and she's a very bright child, so she's really comprehending at a deeper level. And her teacher led her to Christ, and the parents were fine with it, and this was the parents' reaction. We never want to step in the way of what belief she has, but she keeps talking about it at home. And so I asked the family, and I said, I would never want to overstep here, but I know that she's been asking for a Bible. Would it be okay with you if I gave her one at graduation? And they said, yeah, that would be fine. Over the summer, that next summer, they sent me pictures of her reading it.
Wow. She's
kept a relationship with this teacher all these years later, and they got together, and the teacher took her Bible to the house and said, let's do Bible study and devotional. And so they sent me this photo, and they're sitting next to each other with the little kid's Bible and the teacher with her Bible. So this story, this doesn't happen every day, of course, but that's what being missional means.
But that's a real story.
It's a real
that
story.
Would never happen in a covenantal, because that family would not be admitted to a covenantal approach to Christian education.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. So when you look back at your third grade teacher, who you fell in love with, not just who she was in the classroom, but this multidimensional aspect, aerobics and the boyfriend and 28 years old, what are some things that round you out, things that fill you up, things that people might be surprised about, music you listen to, food you enjoy, traveling that you enjoy? Round out the picture for us here.
Yeah. I love to travel. You know this, Drew. And so life gets busy, right? And it's hard to make the time to go away. But one thing that I have committed to being on a school schedule is, okay, there are breaks. And so we're going to travel during those times. It took my husband several years to be like, oh, so we can only ever travel this week in April and these weeks in December. But that has been something that rounds me out. I love to experience, like so many of us, new places, new food, new things. My favorite thing to do is to travel to a new country and not have anything planned for the day and just wander and go see what people do, go in little boutiques. I love to shop. I love to see kind of what the local fashion looks like. I love to go to bookstores. What do local authors have out? Little random coffee shops. Just what does life feel like in these places? It's fun, but it also just gives me perspective. I love seeing places where life maybe moves more slowly. I love to read biographies and autobiographies. I love the story of people. And why do people do what they do? So kind of thinking back to my teacher, I think that I always want to know who's behind what I see in that person. Who are they beyond that? And I think that's what resonated so much with me, or with that teacher, was she was this whole person. And why I like reading in that way is I think it helps me understand people better. And I feel like I'm a better person because I will be more graceful and more gracious when we know that people have a story beyond what we know them for professionally or, in any other aspects. I love to walk and hike. So whenever I have time, just to get on a long, long walk. And if I'm good, leaving my phone behind or an Apple Watch behind, so there's no text message or phone call or email that'll come up. Those are the best moments for me. I feel like I'm my best self, and I'm most creative. So I will find that if I am not walking, I'm not as creative.
And knowing that you lead a large staff, and you serve a large student body with households, again, one of the largest preschools in Los Angeles, that are across the whole spectrum of belief, ideologically, politically, socioeconomically, ethnically. I imagine that's not easy to navigate, especially when there's hot moments within culture where, going back to what you shared earlier, a lot of people have a lot of opinions of what you should be doing in the moment. But is there anything in your private life that makes you a better leader, particularly within the complex crisis navigating that situation here in Los Angeles?
Yeah. There's so much noise in that. I know you feel that as well in the role that you're in. It's a simple question. And when things get really crazy or really stressful, or I'm feeling pressure to make decisions that maybe don't feel in alignment, or I will always ask, why am I really here? And how does this benefit kids? And now that sounds crazy, right? Like you're overseeing a coffee shop. How can that question be helpful? But because this community is built around kids, if I don't have this tough leadership conversation, are we going to continue to do something that doesn't give kids the best program they could have? And so that is my one question that I always go back to. So I guess in my private life as well, more than just a practice, it is a question I will always return to. And I think it also ties to calling. I feel grateful for opportunities I've had. And, I think that I think my most authentic prayers, it's, God, what would you have me do? And I'm grateful that I feel quite clear on it. And it's, am I doing everything I can for kids? And if I'm getting swayed in other directions that takes me away from that, well, I'm not walking in what I was called to do, and it makes it a little bit easier. So hard conversations become a lot easier when I think about the impact for kids on the back end of it. And it's not always fun, but it makes it easier.
So having that clear why then orients and reorientates and prioritizes the attention that you give to certain things. And that is so true across every industry, whatever that work is that someone does. Raising the next generation, consulting, creative writing, leading a team. What are some principles that you've learned as you have gone from questioning in those early years here, 8 years ago, but even before that, like, do they know how young I am? And, kind of getting outside of comfort zones. But what are some things that you've learned over the years about how to lead others well, leading a team that has a whole variety of backgrounds, one's desires, you have different high performers, people just kind of getting through the day. Are there any general principles that you've learned that you can think of? Yeah,
spend time with people and learn their skill set. Do not spend the time coaching people into something they don't want to do, they don't have gifting in, and is not going to get the end result, because no one will be happy and you won't move forward. So spend the time on coaching the natural talents, spend the time, coaching for those reach goals, and then orientate around that. So I learned that really, really early on, that if you want to keep if you want to keep having the same issue over and over and over, keep coaching the same thing, expecting different results with a person that's trying to tell you, like, I'm not meant to do this. So I think that's something that I feel very strongly about. Listening, like I mentioned at the beginning, listening, but being willing to speak at the right time. And so I think as a leader, our teams want to know that we will hear them, but that we will make a decision. And that we will make a decision when we say we will make it, and that we will stand by it. It's hard to follow someone that's only listening. So making that decision. And then the last thing I would say is, integrity. And, by the grace of God, trying to lead with integrity in every opportunity, doing what we say we're going to do every single time, so that there's no opportunity to say, well, this looked different for this family, this looked different for this child, it looked different for this staff member. We don't do it perfectly every time, but I think that for me, those principles of identifying people's strengths, coaching those, not spending the time coaching where the strengths are not, listening, but also responding and making a decision, and then doing what we say we'll do every single time, quickly.
So good. So 8 years into the preschool, 9 months or so into the Bel Air Ed Group, a few months into the Bel Air Family Center. What's on the horizon when you look out on the long view?
Yeah.
What are some dreams that you have that maybe are in the early stages that people might be able to dust this off on the archive 10 years from now and say, wow, she had the idea then, and I just saw her doing this or creating this. Is there anything out there that's like big and audacious? And
what I love most, where I think the impact for kids, going back to are we impacting kids well, is in early childhood education. There's so many really small preschools that don't have the ability to have an infrastructure of support and of leadership. So when I think long-term, being able to help preschools, rise to their full potential so that we can give kids the experience that they deserve every day, is something I dream about. What does that look like? I have some ideas, but there's so many gifted educators that are in the classroom, and a lot of gifted educators in preschool that sometimes go, whoa, I feel like I'm working in business all of a sudden and not in education. How do I navigate this gap in between? And I love that gap. And I think when we fill that gap, we can get more kids what they need. So I'm always thinking about that and how we do that. And then when you were talking about Judah's new business, I was like, go Judah. I was always creating a new business as a child. Go to the target market, research. Had I really followed my path that wasn't education, I would have opened a boutique and had a store. So maybe someday when I retire, I'll have a little shop down on Ventura Boulevard.
What would you call it?
Oh, what would I call it? So I got really into thrifting in my early 20s, and I had this really dorky social media name, Thrifty Cocoon. And
Thrifty Cocoon.
Like the hidden butterfly would come out of the thrifted goods. So I'm not going to call it that, but.
So it can't be on Ventura because for those who live in LA, they know that Magnolia Street in Burbank is like the hot spot. It's the mecca for thrifting.
That's true. Yeah.
There's other places, Melrose, of course,
yes.
But you've got a lot of options. Abbott Kinney, on and on and on.
That's true. Magnolia, the first year I lived here, I lived in Burbank, and so I hit the hot spots there.
Man, that takes me back.
Right.
We used to go to this place on Magnolia. I think it was not only a thrift store, but they would get items that were donated from television and movie sets.
Yes.
And then they have little signs like this was on, Third Rock from the Sun. This was on, on and on and on. So fun.
But no plans for that.
No plans for that right now.
That's
off on the horizon.
That's off on the horizon. I will survey the target market.
So let me end with this. So we're at the table, and it's interesting because Jesus spent, it seems like the majority of his public ministry with people of so many different backgrounds, and it was often surrounding meals. He was either on his way to, at, or having just left a meal. Are there, in particular, moments in your life when you've been at a meal where something significant happened or profound happened? Whether it was a family member, a friend, a colleague, a mentor, like any particular meals, not just for the food.
Yeah.
You can dip into that if you want, if you want to talk about what you ordered, but more importantly, the interactions that were memorable for you. Do any come to mind?
Yeah, I have to pause because there's so many, because it's at the table where these important things happen. Oh, okay. I have to choose one. I would say this one was more recent. So my in-laws are Korean, and we spent the holidays with them. And my mother-in-law is a great cook, and she doesn't like to be gone from home too long because she likes her cooking best and she likes Korean food best. And so we had traveled with them, and so we went and met up with them, and they were about 4 days into the trip, and she could do no more American food. She was over it. So my husband had researched a Korean restaurant in the area, and so we go. I am the only blonde person in the whole room. Everyone's speaking Korean. We're with my in-laws, family, friends, and the look on my mother-in-law's face, she was so happy, but there was this really, really special conversation that happened. So these family friends were there, one of which is my father-in-law's childhood friend from Korea. They've known each other since they were 15, and they've stayed in touch all of these years. And so another family friend is kind of like translating, the story. And my father-in-law is trying to say like what his hope is for our family long term. And we're sitting there, and I'm hearing him, and I basically say to him, that's all we want too. And I'm so glad that you felt like you could tell us. And I look over, and his friend is weeping. And his friend says, like, do you know how rare this is for a family to be able to gather like this and have an open conversation? And he go, this is getting translated back to us. And, it was just this really beautiful moment of my father-in-law, who's not someone that shares emotions at all, sharing something that was so important to him, being vulnerable. And I'm pretty sure I saw a tear in his eye too. So I think that's probably one of the most impactful stories over a meal.
So beautiful.
Recently.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, do you have one recommendation for, and it doesn't need to be a parent with kids, but is there one thing that you think would help people connect with other people? There's a bit of we've come out of one pandemic, and yet many are saying that there's a pandemic of loneliness or disconnection, that we are more aware of what's going on in the world, and yet there can be difficult things. Yeah. Is there anything that is it signing up for something? Is it showing up to something? Yeah. What are some things that you would recommend for deeper connection in people's lives?
I would say this, and I say it to myself too. So like, show up to something, and then like while you're feeling awkward, like say to somebody like, do you want to be friends? And that sounds so funny. I literally did that this last week. Like it was, so I could tell someone felt awkward. Like we had showed up at an event at the family center, and like we were having small talk. And then I finally just said, let's just pretend like we're teenagers again. Like, are we friends? Like, do we want to be friends after this? And she was like, yeah, I want to be your friend. So I think just, I don't know, knowing that a lot of us feel more insecure than maybe we let on in new settings. I think a lot of us are looking for connection. And, I'm a fan of like, what do you have to lose? They may think you look silly. I may sound funny saying it right now, but say it because somebody else probably wants to hear it. They probably want to say it and they're too afraid.
Well, you said going back to high school, when you were saying that, I was thinking, well, at the end of the day, we're all just grown-up third graders.
Yeah.
And it comes back to that. And we can be those people that maybe we weren't in third grade or that we wished somebody would be for us.
Yes.
And your point, 9 times out of 9 likely, people respond in a positive way.
Yeah.
And if not, then move on quickly.
Move on quickly. There will be someone else,
Right.
and no one will ever know.
No, totally. Well, it's great spending time with you.
Same.
How can people connect with you? Are there any websites that maybe are relevant for people to connect and see resources?
I would say belairfamilycenter.org would be the best place because you can find a way to get connected and stay connected. If you are interested in education, of course, belairpreschool.org. And I think all my contact info is there as well. So
great.
I'm not hard to find.
Love it. Well, thanks for the time. Thanks for coming to At the Table. Much love to you.
Honored to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah.